Hi folks, you're with Tassless today at your Pushback channel, and thank you for joining this radio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about probably one of the hottest topics that does the rounds of the globalist controlled media and our educational institutions, in fact all our institutions that have been infiltrated by the globalist Marxist propagandists, and have a look at this issue of racism. I just white people, you cannot look at a single article or look at anything on media, on the cable news channels or the mainstream media or online or newspapers, magazines. It doesn't matter where you go. White people, there's just this endless torrent of not allegations, assertions, claims, charges that all white people are racist, they're Nazis, they're fascists, they're bigots. Hitler! And is any of it true? And given how, certainly all the cases of racism that the media, gush and froth over and rush to without any evidence, all of them have been fake. They've been hoaxes, or they've been willful, misinterpretations of the events. So you look at something like those Catholic schoolboys in Washington being accused of being racists, and Jussie Smollett, and that's mentioned or featured in the thumbnail on this video, and everything. The list of hoaxes is almost endless, and it's given there's such a shortage of racism, the industry, the race hustler industry, has to invent it, and boy, do they're nonstop at inventing that and accusing people of. So now it's so bad that if you even question mass migration or open borders, or just ask simple basic questions, then you're accused of being a Nazi, a fascist, Hitler, and all that sort of stuff. So that's how sort of sensitive and jumpy and trigger happy the people that are pushing the globalist project. Now, the globalist project is to stuff as many black and brown peasants into the white West as they can. They know it's not wanted. They know it's not popular. They know that they haven't asked permission from the local population through referenda or something like that. So the only thing they can do is just scream you down, just shout you down by racist, fascist, Hitler. That's all they can do. But I want to look at racism in its totality and say, well, has racism, certainly as it's depicted today, the hatred of non-white people purely because they're non-white or because they're brown or black and that sort of thing, has racism ever existed? Certainly in my lifetime. Now, I would assert that it hasn't, or that it was extremely rare, sort of in earlier days. Now, just going in my own school days, I spent, to say, in early high school, I was for about a year, I was in a very multicultural high school, and thankfully it was an unpleasant experience, but not because of the color of people's skin, it was their behavior. Now, there were various gangs. Remember, these are like 11-year-old kids. There are various gangs around even then of, the Arabic gang and the fucking Irish gang, and all that sort of stuff was going on. But I don't recall that there were some slurish words that were used, but that went both ways. That wasn't uniquely white. But the main groups were the Arabs, I suppose, were the main group really that were non-white. Not many Chinese, hardly any back at the time. A few Indians, mainly Fijian Indians rather than Indian Indians. And I don't think there was. There was some few others, I don't know, North Africans, not very many. So just looking at a few Greeks, some Italians, that sort of thing. But generally, I don't recall, even amongst the kids, any what I would call racist behaviour, just disliking someone or being difficult with them solely because they were black or brown or something like that. I don't ever recall that. And maybe it happened. I don't recall having those views. They was other kids. Now, if they behaved differently, then that was an issue. So when you bring over large groups of people from whatever part of the world, it doesn't matter, then you'll find that as a group, they tend to reinforce each other's behavior. So they don't, the assimilation rate is much slower. People learn English at a much slower rate. They integrate and assimilate much more slowly and are much more resistant to integrating and assimilating. I'm much more likely to take the view that the habits and behavior of the old country, where they've come from, should be maintained because it makes them feel better. They're more comfortable. They relate to it better. Now, also, you feel very insecure. There's an in-between thing where if you bring enough people from another country into the West, or any other country for that matter, enough people in there, there's enough of them, they'll still be very insecure about being in a new country, but they'll deal with that insecurity not by assimilating as quickly as they can, which smaller numbers of people do, but by even hardening their attitudes in keeping the behaviours and the cultural behaviours of the old country. So it ends up forming a resistance factor simply because they're insecure. They want to deal with that insecurity by behaving differently. So I remember the Arabic kids at school. They would speak Arabic in the home, so their English was always, they were always in the bottom classes for English, and anything that required good command of English, which is a lot of subjects back at the time. This was before affirmative action and political correctness and all that sort of thing. So these were kids had to strictly pass or fail an exam, and they were failing in large numbers. If you look at the lower classes, and they even had one class which they at the school they called it the general activity class. It's where like the system had given up on these kids. Now there's some white kids in there, but they were people who had dyslexia and or were had an IQ that was very low, but not low enough at the time to classify them as handicapped. They were sort of on the borderline, and they were left in the normal high school system or education system. So they were they were in the general activity class, and even as a kid I was stunned at how moronic these people were. But and again, dyslexic people were also in that group, and they weren't necessarily stupid, but dyslexia wasn't understood to the extent it later was. But do I recall the teachers or engaging? I didn't. I don't recall it at all at the time. And this was meant to be in the heyday of the most wicked, evil, fascist, Nazi, Hitler racism that we've ever seen in the history of the entire universe, thrice over and everything. But I don't remember any of it. I remember that the behavioural difference was the problem, but I don't remember that there was any difference based on race. That this person's got a brown skin or a black skin, or therefore they must be discriminated. I don't remember any of that ever. And but the Arabic kids did behave differently, and like coming from those peasant tribal places, you respect the tribal elders, but they had no culture of respecting independent institutions. They had no culture of that we in the West do have, and have had for quite some time, so that the teacher had no real authority in their view. That person is, they're not Muslim, they're not Arab, they're not part of my family, they're not part of my village, they're not approved of by the tribal elders, therefore they have no real authority. And the whole institution has no authority. So if I decide I want to go and steal something from the cabinet in the classroom, that's okay, because that person has no authority to stop me, and their authority to prevent me from doing it I don't recognise. So if that teacher tries to stop me from stealing from the cabinet, then they're assaulting me, and I have a right to defend myself. therefore have a right to have a punch up with the teacher. And this was the attitude that the Arab kids had, and I was absolutely shocked by it. I'd never seen this sort of thing before. Other Arab kids would join in, and you'd have punch-ups with the teacher. I remember vivid memories of an Arab kid helping himself to stuff out of the cupboard and the teacher trying to stop him, and the kid just pushed the teacher off and kept on going. Now, you see that same behaviour from people coming from Africa and various other places. They've got no concept of independent authority and independent institutions, and so they see authority through a completely different lens. Even the kids of people, who kids were born here, and they still have that attitude. And there were kids that had come to Australia at 2 years old or something, and they still had that. So there was concern over behaviour, but not race. So now the behaviour of these Arab kids, a number of other kids, not just the Arab, but anyone that came from those third world peasant areas, even Greek or Italians that came from remote rural areas of Greece or Italy, again, they had no concept of first world institutions. Even they struggled, not as much as the Arabs, but they struggled as well with this idea of authority, follow instructions, sit still in the classroom. I think there was only, going off the top of my head, I think there was only one black kid, who, by the way, wasn't as bad as the Arabs. So he was, I don't know, sort of well behaved. I don't remember people discriminating against. Again, some of the titles, some of the terms and the pejoratives and so on that were used by the white kids that were not in a majority at the school, by the way. To describe the non-white people, the attitude of white people. This is our country, and you're here so you fit in with us. It doesn't go the other way around. And there was that, which was hardly a racist view. But if someone behaved differently, sufficiently differently from what was considered the norm in a polite white society, then they would be viewed negatively. It just so happened that the majority of people that behaved differently, very differently, in a number of ways, and I'll come back to that, they happened to be non-white. But white kids that behaved badly were much fewer, although they were there, and they were punished just as severely, because in those days, punishment with the cane was a standard way of controlling, misbehaving boys. And some of the teachers, I think, got off on giving kids the cane. I remember the Arab kids could be caned into next week, like every way from Sunday, and they still wouldn't change their behaviour, which I thought was quite remarkable. Like if you're getting caned almost every day, wouldn't you stop doing the things that would cause you to get caned? But because they didn't accept the authority of the independent institution, that is the teachers and so on, they didn't see the punishments as legitimate, and they only saw it as, I just didn't get away with it. I was unlucky to get caught. They saw it in that way, which some of the white kids did as well, but it was notable amongst the brown and black kids or darker kids. So I don't remember the Indians misbehaved in particular. In fact, off the top of my head, I can't think they misbehaved at all. Just thinking that. So it was very much third world, village Arabic type situations that were the problem in behaviour. But again, coming back, I don't recall it being racist in any way. There were situations where I remember there was a teacher that taught French and something else, and there were these couple of Arabic guys that were constantly causing trouble, and she called out. She said something in French, wanting to have the last word, that you're nothing but dogs, the chien, and the Arabic kids didn't understand that, so. She kind of got away with it. I don't think you get away with it today, but the behaviour was exceptional, and they refused to behave and refused to be controlled, and they would be sent to the the relevant relevant teacher or the deputy principal or something to get the cane, they would just refuse to go. So you had crazy situations where the deputy principal, sometimes with an assistant, would come along and drag these kids out to give them the cane. The kids would refuse to put their hand out to get caned, and so the drama was endless. So it's a behavioural thing. It wasn't a racist thing, and that's important to note. So this idea of the racist past and all these racist white people, and fascists and Nazis and Hitler and all this sort of stuff, that's bullshit. That is absolute bullshit. And I was at the epicenter of that as a kid, and I don't recall any overt racism. You could say there's an undertone, some of the language used, but then the language used by the brown and black people about the whites was equally racist. So you couldn't hold whites up as being uniquely racist in any way. And that was only sort of muttered language or spoken amongst themselves. There were situations where the gangs may exchange insults. But again, not uniquely racist or racist white people. They each were giving as good as they got. Now, moving forward into, say, now I'm an older guy. I then went to a school, by the way, where there was no black and brown people. So it was all white, all Anglo-Saxon, all Christian, and that sort of stuff. And whereas in the multicultural school, the police were around every fucking day. Kids were trying to hang each other across the parallel bars, and there were kids that were, one kid was held down by the Arab kids and had cigarettes burned on his legs and everything, his hands, and the police were around. That was the sort of place it was, and 11-year-old kids with flick knives. The list went on. So going to the upper middle class school where it's all white, all Christian, and all this sort of stuff. Still co-ed, but there was none of that. There was I don't recall the police ever came around. It was the behaviour was, by comparison, the behaviour was well behaved to the nth degree. Again, in the multicultural school, there were these quite vicious punch-ups. People really being injured. Multiple times during lunchtime and after school, and again, police presence and all sorts of things going on. But if that even happened once every few months at the all Christian, all white school, and that was it. So the behavioural differences were huge. So when you get, if you get 100, for example, 100 Arabs, I'm picking Arabs randomly because they were the majority there in the brown school. If you get 100 Arabs and 99 of them behave that way, causing trouble, being disruptive, bringing flick knives to school and all that sort of stuff. If 99, then you're already looking at the idea that, well, hey, hold on a minute, I really need to be a little bit extra cautious here about these Arabs. Does it mean every Arab misbehaves, or the Arabs that misbehave when they're younger will continue to misbehave? No, of course it doesn't mean that. But when you get that much behaviour, for example, the radical feminists, if they discover, they say, well, if even one woman is being abused by a wicked, evil, fascist Nazi husband, then all women are abused. Therefore, all men are suspect. It's okay for them to do that. But when it's to do with behaviour of different races and different racial groups, no, that's racist, that's bigoted, that's fascist, that's Nazi, you're Hitler for doing that. So you can see the double standard there that's being applied. Coming now to being like I'm old and I'm in the workforce and all that sort of thing. I'm travelling around the world doing business in all continents, and that's do I see white people being racist? I don't see that as I get older. Someone came into the street where I bought a house, and they were Chinese, I think, and this was quite rare. This was be the first non-white, non-Anglo person in the street. I remember everyone was very helpful to what they needed, and was explaining to people how things work, explaining to the people how things work. The wife's English was very ordinary, and I remember everyone being very helpful. And showing, telling her these are the shops you can go to, this, and they being the only non-white people in the street, they were very, very interested in assimilating as quickly as they could, and they were very focused on it, tried very hard. I think she or he or maybe even both of them went to night school to learn English and this sort of thing, which I think was supplied by the government free of charge back then. Probably still is now. So you saw them, but so I don't see any sign of racism there, none. So if any, people were the other way, they were more than helpful, far more helpful to that Chinese family than they would have been if some white folks had moved in. So, in fact, another bunch of white folks did move in. They were from Finland or Norway or somewhere like that, and they fitted in seamless because they all looked the same and this sort of stuff. They spoke with a heavy Scandinavian accent, but I don't remember anybody being as helpful to them as they were to the Chinese family there. But again, this was a time that's supposed to be rampant with evil, wicked, fascist racism. That was just simply not the case. Now, also in employment, I don't remember. One of the earlier jobs I had, I'm still in fact at school, so this was like a job over a summer holidays to make a bit of extra pocket money. And I remember they hired I think she's from the Philippines. There was a youngish girl, still had an accent, and they hired her to do something in the office. I think what it was, some admin role. Again, I don't remember the slightest sign of racism there. It's just, if there was, it was something that I didn't see. Not that I had my antenna sort of out a mile, but I saw no example of it. I saw no either underlying. Whatever. Now, the difference here is this lady or young lady, I can't imagine she's more than early 20s, but I'd have been like 15 or 16 at the time. But she, I don't remember her behaviour being any different from what you'd sort of expect, within the realms of, realistic possibilities. So, but again, given her behaviour was consistent with more or less what you'd expect in that sort of job, that sort of situation, and so on. I don't remember seeing any racist attitude towards her at all by anybody. In fact, she's given a job suggests there's no racism. So, as again going older, I was hiring, Indians and hired some black people, hired all sorts of different types, and without even a thought of the racism side of things or their race. Could they do the job? Did they behave acceptably? Were they disruptive or refusing to accept direction? That sort of stuff. And as long as they behaved as was needed and expected and required for that employment, it made no difference to me where they were from. Nor do I remember my work colleagues or other people in the organisation showing or expressing any what would be today viewed as racist attitudes. Far from it. Now, there was one company that we did business with that had a brief foray with, they suddenly got all carried away with hiring Indians, and we did business with them, and so they were sort of forcing out, they were refusing to hire white people, instead hiring Indians. This was in the very early days when the Indians were coming to Australia, and I was quite surprised by the way they overplayed their hand. It was overt racism against white people, and that created resentment. And that resentment, you could say, manifested in racist attitudes, but it wasn't that. It wasn't racism, as I would understand. There was nothing against those people. It was against the policies of preferring those people over the white people. That was the issue. Today they dressed up as racism, but it wasn't. Far from it. Now, as I travelled the world, I found that the various countries, black and brown and whatever, they're acutely racist to other groups and tribes within their nation states. So I found rampant and quite unpleasant examples of very overt racism by brown and black people against other groups and tribes and areas and that sort of thing. That they were certainly quite unpleasant towards white people. And speaking Chinese, I was able to go into meetings, and I wouldn't say that I spoke Chinese. I was able to go into meetings and listen to what they were saying, and they were saying the most terrible things, like just this fucking asshole and that fucking this and that fucking that type equivalent. Not that words exactly, but those sort of things. And the most unflattering and racist, the brown people being racist towards me, not the other way around. And they didn't know that I could understand what they were saying. And I kept looking dumb and smiling, and so they would keep on going. So, and they would plot to screw me over, and let's see what we can get out of this asshole, and that sort of thing. And damn white guys. The company's probably got lots of money. Let's see if we can grab a shitload of it, and all this sort of stuff, and not commercially very pleasant either. Their talk was rarely about, okay, how can we work with this guy to be successful in selling these products or using them, or whatever the particular situation may have been. But that was rare. That just didn't happen. Well, no, it did happen. It just didn't happen very often. Most of the time, they were plotting to screw me over and using the most derogatory language to describe. They couldn't say, they couldn't just talk to me, Mr. Billy Bob or something. It was the equivalent of asshole motherfucker and all this sort of stuff. So I found and encountered a lot of racist attitudes. But as I travelled around the United States or all the white countries, I don't recall coming across racist attitudes that today we would call racist. In fact, in the white countries, even going back to the 80s, I was a very young guy, just sort of fresh out of the gate, really, and I don't recall seeing any of these attitudes. Now, I do, as time went on, I do recall people saying, "Gee, that the immigration is the mass immigration of black and brown people, it's coming too fast and it's too much." And, that I recall, but that's not racist. I do recall when masses of brown people arrive with very different attitudes, behaviours, customs, and everything else. That's considered quite alien, but that's not racist. Just identifying someone's behavioural difference would happen regardless of whoever moved in next door. If people moved in next door who were white and spoke my language, but behaved differently and behaved strangely, or in a way that was, I thought, injurious to my state of existence or standard of living, I would be equally concerned. It's the behaviour that's the issue, not the race of someone. And this is where we're losing direction in this whole debate today. You've been a Tacitus today, your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.